So welcome to our study of Treasury of Precious Qualities by Omniscient Jigme Lingpa. And I don't know, it's getting worse, ladies and gentlemen. My sort of how do you say, flawed organizational skills. You would have all received, presumably all of you would have received an email that says now the study of Treasury of Precious Qualities will be on Saturdays, right? And it says that a few times. But then at the end it says time, Sunday, 5:30 p.m. So of course I was just basically recycling an old email and overlooked that it said a Sunday when in fact we obviously are doing this on a Saturday now. And the reason why we're doing it on a Saturday is because tomorrow there's a really great course that's starting, organized by Tsiring children, and which will have the participation of many great qualified people on the subject of living is dying. Simply the very fact that the premise of our existence being a dependent arising, birth exists on the basis of death, and death exists on the basis of birth. So as such, there's nothing really too worrying about the situation, really. But at the same time, we are terribly attached to this present phenomenon of this life. So there's every reason to be aware of the fact that some preparation would probably be good. And of course, it's always like that, the more we prepare for something, the better equipped we are to meet it. And this also includes the circumstance of death. And that is where we actually are privileged in encountering a science that actually, for which death is not a mystery. It's not an unknown. It is very often sort of in the rather sort of vague romantic language that we have around death. You know, we always have these sort of cliches like so-and-so has gone to their maker, or now so-and-so has found peace. And these are absolutely unsubstantiated cliches that have no bearing on reality. It's not at all like that. And in fact, the point really with dying is that it doesn't really change things. The same cause and effect applies. So whatever we have, whatever we contain, even though we might not have our body might be exhausted, the basic creator of experience is in no way affected by that. So that's where what we're presently doing, and what also will be, of course, the theme of tomorrow, is we are working with the creator of our experience, namely our own mind. And we're doing this within a science that specializes in the mind. Like I'm always saying that in Tibet, the sort of highest development of technology might have been the butter tea churner and some advanced saddle technology. But other than that, the speciality and the expertise of the Tibetans really lie in that which is within modern science the hard problem of consciousness. So that for the Tibetans is not the hard problem. And that's where we're privileged then to be able to study within the present context, then Treasury of Precious Qualities. So as always, kindly generate the intention that what we are studying here is something which addresses the very core issue of suffering everywhere, namely the delusional mind that gets itself into various states. And that is actually where we presently are looking at the various creations of the mind, which we refer to as the 6 realms. So we begin with the supplication to the lineage and to Jigme Lingpa, the source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is knowable, emanation of Longchenpa, heir to a treasury of mind tamers, sky-like yogin of the vast expanse of luminosity. Jigme Lingpa, at your feet we pray. So then in the text, we're presently looking at the asuras. So in the root text, it reads, the asuras' minds are torn asunder by the battle axe of envious rage against the glory of the gods, and further in the fray against the latter's furious host, they are tormented by the cutting off of head and limbs. The thing about the asuras is that they're actually okay. There's nothing in the asura realm that is lacking. There's only one problem, and that is they look to those who have more. So this is the situation that we're actually okay, but we can't get over the fact that others have more than us. And that is essentially the mind of competitiveness, the mind that compares, the mind that then is afflicted by jealousy. So that's where the peace of mind that the asuras actually would be able to enjoy is destroyed because they are warring against the gods. The thing is, the gods, who don't really suffer the same sort of, they're a bit more cool than the asuras. They're not as feverish in their sort of style of battle, and they always come out winning. The asuras also feel it's terribly unjust what's happening. We would say the image is that you have this great tree that grows in the realm of the asuras, and the asuras tend to this tree, but it grows up into the skies where the gods, they come floating by on their clouds and pick all the fruit. And so the asuras, of course, they operate with this sense of justified rage. And that's where they wield war on the gods, but they always lose. And that's where they then experience the cutting off of head and limbs. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, although the lord of the asuras, Vimachitra, lives in well-guided, this is the place, his palace on the ground of gold, and although golden city, his capital, and perfect jewel, his council chamber, are filled with riches, the asuras themselves are consumed with jealousy at the greater wealth and glory of triumphant, the palace of the gods of the heaven of the 33, and at their city, fair to see, and perfect law, their council chamber. Overpowered by the sheer force of their envy, they go to war against the gods. But the army of the gods has at its disposal a fearful arsenal, and the gods themselves cannot be vanquished unless their heads are severed from their bodies. By contrast, the humans are like humans, the asuras are like humans, and are killed when wounded in their vital organs. By their dreadful weapons, the gods can cut off the heads and limbs of the asuras, who suffer intensely. The text description of the asuras gives the reason for birth in such a state. Those whose conduct is false and crafty, who commit many wrongs, and who take delight in conflict, but who are nevertheless generous, will become powerful asuras. So the thing about the asuras is that they're very easily identified as beings that have a comfortable life, yet are consumed with comparison, competitiveness, and essentially jealousy. And again, here and continually what necessarily has to run as a red thread through our study of the 6 realms is that, as everything within relative truth, the world is constructed by the mind. So we understand the nature of the asuras in terms of psychology, and particularly us in the modern world, we would understand the asura realm very much in terms of the embodied experience of jealousy. Where we need to, unfortunately, break it to the modern Buddhist is that the mind does not just end with the physical death of this particular human embodiment, but continues to recreate itself. And that's where mind recreates also realms, styles of experience, styles of body, and so forth. And that's where then, when we're talking about the Asura realm, we are literally talking about a place. We are talking about an experience of a lifetime. And that's where, of course, we could say everything is the mind, right? Yes. And that's simply, we also refer to the Pentagon as the mind, New York City as the mind, the Sydney Harbor Bridge as the mind. This person is mind. The room I'm in is mind, for sure. And as such, it's my mind and my particular style of psychology that has created this reality. But for us presently, the point really is that it's not about that we're destined to go to this place, that the point is that we can work with the mind. So this is not being given to us as some sort of like, this is where you're bound to go, but it's more given to us as we can understand how mind creates the worlds that we inhabit, and how we presently, in working with the past, we are onto this mind, we're working with this mind, we're purifying this mind, and we're eliminating the delusion that consolidates this duality, which is the creator of the various conditions of samsara. So we're onto what really is the cause of these various painful existences. So then we come to the suffering of human beings. And that's where we have again the famous three styles of suffering. The first is suffering of suffering. And that's where the root text reads, "Our human life is fleeting, fitful like a bubble. Conflicts and unhappiness and all the rest torment us in succession one by one. They are like wounds inflicted on a leper's sores." So we don't see a lot of lepers nowadays, but I tell you, if you just have to go to Delhi, India, and very often you see people who actually have a whole, almost like a career, essentially living off their wounds. And that is where you can very often meet in the streets people who are missing fingers, or, you know, parts of their limbs are eaten and so forth. Anyway, the point here is really, when it comes to this human experience, we first have the actual ordinary, very conspicuous style of suffering, where it says, this life is but a fleeting moment, a bubble on the water. Human existence is indeed brief and uncertain. One moment it is here, the next it is gone. People are frustrated in their desires and find no satisfaction. They clash with others and come to grief. Suffering follow one after the other. First one's father dies, then one's mother. One is attacked by enemies and overwhelmed by disease and wickedness. We are like lepers who must suffer other hurts and injuries in addition to our leprosy. So that's essentially where everything just goes wrong and is painful, the suffering of suffering. Then the next, suffering of change, the root text reads, "And in the garden of the higher realms replete with all delight, we long to taste the objects of desire, and eating of this poisoned food, our bodies are brought down to torment. All that we have gained is changing, mirage-like." Everything, essentially, as much as something that brings us comfort, is something that changes. The higher realms, Kangyur Rinpoche then writes, are like a pleasure garden where delight seems all prepared, and where the five objects of sense pleasures are eagerly sought. They are sweet indeed at the moment of their enjoyment, and yet to indulge in them is like eating contaminated food. At first, it delights the tongue and produces a pleasant sensation in the stomach. But little by little, the poison makes its presence felt, and the pain begins. A complete physical change takes place. The body weakens and is filled with agony. The complexion darkens and the mind is filled with anguish. In just the same way, all joys and pleasures gained through past actions and present conditions are like a mirage. They turn to suffering. So this is where we suffer from change. Of course, when we're meditating on impermanence, then sometimes, like Tongsa Khyentse Rinpoche will make the point, actually impermanence is not by definition bad. Just like when we talk about one of the characteristics of samsara is that everything is empty. Now, both emptiness and impermanence is not necessarily bad, but it's just that we have a hard time with it, and we have a particularly hard time when things that we like, they turn sour, when we lose what we like. But of course, Rinpoche's point is that the pain can turn to pleasure. But presently we're looking at suffering. And that's where we then need to emphasize this fact that what we really care for and what we strive for, you could say the whole agenda of our lives every moment is pretty much accomplishing happiness. This never lasts. So that's where we understand that the very nature of the pleasure that we seek, it's already, you could say, that already is, by its nature, it is contaminated in that it doesn't last. Then it says, all-pervading suffering in the making. And that is the very nature of duality, the very nature of delusion is, as long as there is this sense of I and its object, then we are always, in fact, permeated by a condition that is prone to suffering. So here it says, all-pervading suffering in the making is suffering that is not manifest in the present moment, but which is latent, stored in the alaya, the fundamental level of the mind. It also refers to the fact that most of what we do for the sake of happiness is, in fact, the cause of future pain. What the footnotes say. Excerpt taken from, this is from Kangyur Rinpoche. Yeah. So that's the suffering as per Kangyur Rinpoche. And then here in the root text it says, the story of the king who could not bear to walk on his 2 feet, but mounted wearily his elephant that, lusting for its mate, was driven wild and threw him down into a steep abyss, describes pervasive suffering in the making. Okay. Kangyur Rinpoche says, once upon a time, in a land called Shining, there was a king by the name of Radiant. King Radiant could not bear to go anywhere on foot, and therefore ordered that an elephant be domesticated for his use. The elephant was duly broken in with goads of steel. These what are they called again? Ankushas, hooks essentially. Terrifying thing. And in the end, it was so tame that it would do anything the king wanted. I'm tired of having to walk, the king said to himself, and climbing the elephant's neck, went about without a care in the world. However, the elephant's thoughts were unsubdued by the vows of Dharma taught by the Buddha for the taming of the afflictions, and so when it caught the scent of a female elephant, its mind became wild with excitement. It raced along with such speed that the earth itself seemed to be turning somersaults. Finally, the great beast leapt into a crevice so that the king barely escaped with his life. His terrible experience is an illustration of all-pervading suffering in the making. So there you go. Don't do that. You'll have to bear with me. Here I'm a little bit lost with regards to the example. But anyway, I hope you appreciate the sort of the nature really of, I guess the point here really is the nature of just samsara in all its sort of its curious variations carries the potential of suffering. So even the king wanted to have a comfortable ride. He ended up on a horny elephant, yes. Okay. So the 8 complementary sufferings, these, by the way, are not always that we come about these, but particularly in the Longchen Niti, this is something that Longchen he emphasizes, and hence also Jigme Lingpa, he mentions it. So it says here, 28 and 29, yeah. In the wilderness of threefold sorrow prowls the ills of birth, age, sickness, and death. We meet with enemies and things we do not want, while those we love depart and do not stay. The things we wish for are so shy to come, while hardships throng upon our aggregates, 8 kinds of fierce suffering, at all times plague this vine of human life. So in general, we talk about the 4 great rivers of suffering, birth, old age, sickness, and death. But then there's also these additional sufferings. And this is implicit in our condition, where all of these, everything that we experience is essentially the projections that are driven by karma, the actions that we have, you could say, we have imprinted, that lie imprinted within the storehouse consciousness or our memories, if you like. Thus, in accordance with their karma, beings are afflicted through and through by these 3 principal kinds of sufferings. The one we just looked at, suffering of change, and all-pervading suffering. Their lot is really terrible. It is as if they had gone astray in a desolate wilderness where the ills of birth, old age, sickness, and death lie constantly in wait and are a source of great affliction. Beings are pained. They suddenly encounter what they do not want, such as enemies hostile to them. They lose the company of their loved ones who abandon them and go away. They are deprived of what they wish for: wealth and possessions, sympathetic company, influences, and pleasures. Humiliated, they want only to hide themselves, and they must submit to unwanted hardships, immersed in sorrow. These then constitute the 8 unrelenting types of suffering that are intrinsic to the human condition. This is what we have to contend with all the time. So then, among the sufferings, then the first we're going to discuss here is birth. Let's just see here. And old age, illness, and death. So these are what we call the 4 great rivers of suffering that are particular, of course, to the samsaric condition in general, but this is something that we very often really refer to in terms of the human condition. This is what we can observe. So it says here, the womb is like a doorless house of iron, fetid and unclean with humid slime, a place of utter darkness, ill-confined. Here deluded consciousness alights on mingled sperm and blood. Spherical, then string-like, oblong, ovoid, round, then like a fish, then turtle-shaped. 'Tis thus the embryo takes shape in 7 weeks, and in the 26 that follow goes through many transformations. In this ugly thing, the organs of the senses, limbs, and hair take shape. Then, in the 37th week, the fetus, grown in size, now quickens in the womb, has feelings of discomfort, suffering greatly from the actions of its mother, her hunger, thirst, her heat and cold. Then, at the time of birth, the body of the child must pass through what seems the crushing cliffs of hell unbearable. And in such dreadful pain, the mother or her child, or even both, may lose their lives. Such are the agonies of being born. So that's where we have this saying that at the time of birth, both mother and child both go halfway to death. So it says here, the mother's womb is like a doorless iron trap, foul and fetid place, slimy like a muddy swamp. It is tight and cramped and utterly lightless, sunk in deep obscurity. Consciousness, pervaded by ignorance, enters the womb and finds its support in the intermingled sperm and ovum. During the first week of pregnancy, the embryo is round and trembling like a drop of quicksilver. During the second week, it becomes elongated and resembles a string of nasal mucus. In the third week, it is oblong and shaped like a finger. In the fourth, it takes the form of an egg, and in the fifth, it is round and flat. In the 6th week, it has the form of a fish, while in the 7th week, it resembles a tortoise, with head and limbs protruding slightly. Thereafter, and for the space of 26 weeks, the baby passes through many transformations. In what is at first an ugly worm-like thing, there form the basis of the 6 sense faculties, the eyes and so forth, and the baby's limbs with their lesser appendages such as fingers. The 5 vital organs also take place: heart, lungs, liver, pancreas, and kidneys, and likewise the 6 vessel-like organs: stomach, great and small intestines, gallbladder, urinary bladder, and ovaries or testicles. The veins and arteries, wind energies, and essences will manifest together with the blood, lymph, and body hair, developing until they are fully formed. By the 37th week, the fetus strengthens, nourished by the essential ingredients of what the mother eats and drinks, which it receives via the umbilical cord. When the baby has grown sufficiently, it will quicken in the womb and cause some discomfort to its mother. It is then, too, that the baby also begins to feel uncomfortable, caught in a narrow place that is dark and rank, and it suffers on account of its mother's behavior. When she is hungry, it feels as though it is falling into an abyss. When she is thirsty, it feels as though its body is all dried up. When the mother is warm, for example, when she is out in the hot sun, the baby feels as though it is being burnt. When the mother is cold, it feels as if being frozen in ice. If she eats a big meal, the baby feels crushed as by a mountain. When she makes any movement, the baby feels as if it is being thrown from a precipice. Whatever the mother does, whether she eats or drinks, the baby undergoes countless pains. After 8 months and 26 days, the time for delivery arrives. The baby is turned upside down by the action of the karmic wind energy and squeezed through the mother's pelvis, feels as if it were being pulverized between the colliding mountains in the crushing hell. At that moment, either the mother or the infant or both lose their lives, or at least come near to doing so. Such are the agonies of childbirth. Then 34. Emerging from the raw womb, enwrapped in evil-smelling slime, the infant cannot bear the pain, as though its flesh were but a single wound. The memories of former states are dimmed, and searing pain is felt at every touch. So Kangyur Rinpoche then comments, when the baby emerges from the womb, it is enveloped in a slimy, evil-smelling substance. If it slips onto a cushion, it is terrified, feeling as if it had fallen into a pit of thorns. When the substance is being cleared from its skin, the baby feels as if it is being flayed alive. When washed and anointed with butter on the soft part of its scalp, it feels as though wounds were breaking out on its tender flesh, and it experiences great pain. All this suffering obliterates the memory of life in the of the womb, and the infant virtually loses consciousness. The child suffers because all contact is frightening and painful. It suffers because of its own filth, or through illness, heat, cold, hunger, or thirst. And throughout all this, the baby is unable to tell anyone what is happening to it. So as usual, these are perspectives that not necessarily are celebrated in our narrative around childbirth, but it is partly something that I think we can observe, that babies are not comfortable. They might, very often, under good circumstances, childbirth can be, you could say, mitigated in ways that is less painful, but I think everyone can appreciate how coming into a completely unknown environment with this particular fragile condition is something that is profoundly frightening. And as we know, the baby is unable to tell anyone what is happening to it. It's interesting, actually, that on the basis of this insight, and actually on the basis of the very author here, Kangyur Rinpoche, there was a Frenchman, Frédéric Leboyer, who in the 1960s studied with Kangyur Rinpoche, and actually on the basis of these teachings that we're reading here, developed his modality of natural childbirth. And he wrote about this. I forget the name of his book, but it was huge when it came out. And in there, the proposition was that you could actually facilitate, or you could actually create environments in which the child was not subjected to some of the violent treatment that has been tradition in some of the in the Western world. In the old days, you'd sort of take the child out and slap it a little bit, give it some cold water, and get the breath going and all of that, all with the best of intention, but also profoundly traumatizing for the child. And that's where Frédéric Leboyer, again on the basis of Kangyur Rinpoche's teachings, actually proposed that you have a room where it's not too much light, possibly candlelight, and as soon as the child is born, it's actually put on the womb of the mother. And what, of course, was particularly sensational around Frédéric Leboyer's work was that you had actually, and this was documented, and so was actually a child where you very often had children that just would cry for the first period of their life. In a very short time, you had children that actually looked as if they were peaceful and that were comfortable. So we might sort of go, this is a very negative, all this, that is all humid and filthy and all of that. That's just part of the story. That's, there's something very beautiful around childbirth. And of course that's true, but there are also things that we might overlook. And certainly this awareness around the difficulty of the childbirth is something that then leads to an awareness of the gentle childbirth and the possibility of, say, accommodating this situation. But again, of course, the point here is also the experience that we have when we come into this world is not comfortable. So that's where we can, of course, then seek to accommodate it. Anyway, a little bit of an aside, but I think rather significant. This actually resulted in a bit of a revolution within the way that childbirth was approached. So at least in the Western world. Frederick Loboyer, he was part of a little group. Some of you might have seen 54 Gandhi Road, right? 54 Gandhi Road. And there was, I think there was somebody who remarked how actually the students around Kangyur Rinpoche, very often they weren't just on the hippie trail, but some of them were rather educated. And there was a whole group who essentially, on the basis of having seen a Frenchman called Arnaud Desjardins' movie, The Message of the Tibetans, were very drawn to come out and meet the Tibetans. And these were, in many cases, sort of people who already had some, you could say, a role in society, education, and so forth. They weren't necessarily rebelling and from the establishment, but more coming from a place of curiosity, stimulated by these documentaries. Okay, old age. So then 35 and 36 reads, defeated by the punishment of age, youth must bear the burden of decline and grief. Power of movement wanes. A stick is used for leaning on, and joints are wrenched in going back and forth. As faculties decay, the savoring of what was once desired is muted like the heat and light of the enclouded sun. Enfeebled, one must lie upon a bed, one's mind bewildered, rambling far and wide. Okay? Kangyur Rinpoche comments, the rosy color of youth and the grace of beauty of fresh young bodies are blighted and withered with the dreadful scourge of age. The time will eventually come when you will be afflicted with the misery of being dependent on others, an object of contempt and ridicule, without even the strength to attend to the needs of nature. This might sound scary, but this is choiceless. This will happen to everyone. You will not be able to shift we will not be able to shift for yourself and must stumble along, leaning on a stick. Whenever you move, just to get up or sit down or walk from one place to another, your joints will be wrenched and you will fall. Your faculties will be impaired. Your sight and hearing will fail, and your tongue will become thick and inarticulate. Delight in beauty, the enjoyments of the senses, and the company of the members of the opposite sex will no longer seem pleasant. And even if you do feel drawn to them, your mind will be numb and muffled like the heat and light of the sun behind the clouds. All joy will evaporate. Your body will begin to lose its heat and strength. You will have difficulty digesting your food and drink, and extremes of heat and cold will be intolerable. Though confined to bed, your mind will ramble here, there, and everywhere, and you will be confused to the point that you will hardly be able to tell day from night. You will fail to recognize other people and even yourself. This is why respect and care for the old is so important and meritorious. The great master of Ujjain, meaning Guru Rinpoche, said, do not be the heartbreak of the aged. Treat them with courtesy. Illness, 37. When the pool of balanced health is troubled and sensations of disease occur, the weary one who holds to the five aggregates is terrified with fear of death. So the weary one who holds to the five aggregates, that's us. The five aggregates is essentially what constitute body and mind. So that's what we essentially identify as, and that's where death terrifies us. Comments, for beings possessed of bodies composed of the four elements, earth, air, fire, and water, perfect health is accompanied in the root text is compared in the root text, to a limpid pool in which the humors of wind, bile, and phlegm are in perfect balance. When the pool is disturbed and muddied, the torments of disease occur, and pained and exhausted by their illnesses, people who in fact are no more than the combination of the 5 aggregates are troubled in mind and terrified lest they die from their affliction. So there's a place where there's a natural equilibrium, homeostasis, where we're well, but when there are conditions that disturb this equilibrium, then we suffer. And this is again where we, on the basis of our attachment to the 5 aggregates, essentially form, feeling, concept, impulse, and consciousness, we then suffer. Here it says, again from Yönten Gyatso, it says, when the pain of illness manifests in the aggregate of form, feeling experiences it, perception cognizes it as suffering, conditioning factors produce future suffering of the same kind, and consciousness is aware of the entire process. Death, and that's where then 38 reads, nothing in this world is dearer than life. When we are smitten with the suffering of death, dear friends and family, all that we possess are left behind. As we go forth, we know not where. So again, this is the thing we hold dearer than anything, is this present experience of life. It says, life is such a precious thing that all the riches of the world could not be exchanged for it. Yet no one can escape the pains of death. When the moment comes and you are lying on your deathbed, you must take leave of relatives and friends, wealth and possessions, just like a hair pulled out from a lump of butter. Alone you must go forth into the unknown. As it is written in the Maharaja Kanishka Lekha, when the king of death arrives to take you hence, only virtue and misdeeds will keep you company. All others will draw back, with none to follow you. Understand this well and mend your ways. So that simply means that when we pass on, the only thing that will travel with us is the way that we've constructed ourselves. So if we've constructed ourselves with particular emphasis on virtue, there's less worry. If we've essentially constructed ourselves succumbing continually to the self-centered project of the afflictions, the kleshas, then we could well worry. Basically, nothing comes with us that is something that's external to consciousness. But consciousness does come with us, and that is what then creates the future existence, our further experience. So that's why we've now covered within the general realm that we can actually ascertain ourselves: birth, old age, sickness, and death. Meeting unwanted circumstances. So 39 reads, people are undone when meeting with adversities, tormented by these harbingers of pain. It is as when the resting place on which one takes one's ease collapses. There is no relief, but only more affliction. So this is what happens. We meet what we don't want. And that's where we're not cool. We're not at ease with that. That's where, again, it's very easy to identify our you could say self-centering at that point. When unwanted situations arise, such as meetings with enemies, evil forces, or other obstacles, people are distressed, tormented by the prospect of suffering. It is like when exhausted porters find a place to lodge their heavy burdens and rest themselves, only to have the resting place collapse and their bodies wrenched and even injured. This illustrates how impossible it is to find such a thing as permanent relief. We are under constant threat of intense and lasting travail. Suffering from what is loved separation from what is loved. So verse 40 reads, the sorrow felt by lovers newly parted, how vast it would be if it had a form. Enchanted by an elf maid, Norzang fared through peril and through woe, for karma such as this must long endure. So there is apparently a famous story of a young man called Norzang who went through a lot of trouble as he was completely besotted by an elf maid. So that's where this separation that lovers they experience when they separate is something that is hard to bear. It says here, when people who have been living together in a warm and loving relationship are separated, they undergo intense emotional pain merely at the thought of their partner's appearance and character. If such a suffering had form and could be seen, how immense it would be. All this is illustrated in the tale of Prince Norzang, son of Norchen, who for love of a beautiful elf maiden journeyed into peril through lands of terror filled with savage beasts and evil wraiths. Such karmic links are long-lived and must be experienced without end. Not having what one wants. 41. The poor who have not what they want must suffer. They must waste their body and their speech in grip of hope and fear for food and drink not found. They are like pretas moving on the earth. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, some people make the greatest of efforts in trying to get the things they want, but all to no purpose. They finish destitute. Deprived of wealth, they are reduced to poverty and to an unrelenting hunger and thirst. They try everything and yet fail to escape their desperate situation. Of course, in the modern world, we have put so many stops into place so that we won't have to experience what is unwanted, what is poverty, and so forth. And it's, you could say in the modern world, it's like the idea is that it shouldn't happen. And of course, it's very nice when it's compassionate and we don't want it to happen for others. But it is something that is, you could say, endemic within the human condition. So this happens in all sorts of ways, in small ways and in great ways. Having what one does not want. Hopes and fears make people the slaves of business and various other negative actions. Let's see what it says here. In many cases, business is seen to involve dishonesty and exploitation. Yes, so that's why here you say by implicitly business is involved with deception and dishonesty and so on. People wear themselves out and suffer continually, exhausting both their body and speech. Those excellent bases for the practice of Dharma. People who are rich never feel that they have enough and are tormented by the craving to possess more. They think only of their bodily sustenance, constantly occupied, without free time and leisure. They are no different from hungry ghosts running here and there. So essentially here we've looked at the truth of suffering in its various ways, in various forms in terms of the 6 realms and so on. And now we're going to go on. This is really where we are. We're fortunate because we're with a doctor who sees that this condition is curable. So we're going to look at this. Where does this condition of suffering originate from? And the implication is that we can do something. So again, this is not where you sometimes hear the Buddhist teaching misrepresented, where they would say, Buddhists say all life is suffering. And that's not at all what the Buddhists are saying, but they're saying that we need to face the fact that life without awareness, life unconsciously lived, yes, it brings about suffering. And so we need to be conscious, we need to be awake. And that's where the Buddha prescribed then the Four Noble Truths as a way to identify the suffering, where it comes from, identifying that it's curable, and then how to proceed. So they're all very much within, you could say, a situation that this can be remedied. But the first thing that needs to happen for any patient that's suffering of one illness or not, to actually be really clear on what is the condition and what can we do about it. And that's where we then can proceed with the cure. So I think we'll stop at this point today. I'll just see if there's any questions. Okay, yeah, great way to start the teachings, talking about the realms and how the mind creates the worlds in which we live. Do mind of all the cause of creation, do mind of all is the cause of creation of the phenomena of the world in context of buildings, trees, houses, everything that is subject to our senses? Yes. We're not saying there's nothing out there, and this is where in philosophy we talk about the trap of solipsism, where we think, oh, there's nothing but me and just my dream and all of that. That's not really what we're saying. But we're saying the way that we're perceiving the world, we construct it. We're not denying that there is something out there, but the thing is we construct our perceptions. Let's say that I have this, my good old trusty watch that always serves as the example here. This watch, if I go into it, if I really analyze, as any physicist will confirm, there's nothing but particles here. And yet I have a particular conception of this object, even though there is nothing but a field of particles. I have others that see the same watch and we share the perception. Yes, but the reality is that the way that this is perceived, understood, goes through the perceiver, the mind. It's the mind that conceives of this, that perceives this, labels it, and so forth. Essentially constructs this particular object. And likewise also, and that on the basis of my particular karmic disposition, I personally have a human existence within. I see this as a watch. Of course, other realms might see this differently. That is where we have the classical example that the gods will see a glass of water, they will see it like nectar. The hungry ghosts will see it as potentially a weapon. The hell beings will see it as something that brings pain. The animals might see it as a place to reside, and so on. So the perceptions that we all have come about due to the mind. And this is a very important point in terms of us understanding all the Buddhist teachings that present the various realms of existence and all the various experiences that goes beyond the ordinary idea of what we in the West refer to as a causal closure, in which the mind has nothing to do with the external objects. So there's a need for us actually going a little bit into depth with regards to the way that we approach understanding, or rather the way we approach the issue of perception. Where we see it's the mind that essentially creates the perception, that constructs the perception. I'm still struggling with something you said last week. Oh dear, I'm sorry. All right. We should not disturb the Nagas by peeing into lakes. Okay. I do not pee into lakes. I'm glad to hear that. But when I swim, should I consider the Nagas around being hit by my swim strokes? Maybe my neurosis? Basic question. How physical real are the Nagas? Well, they probably look, as long as you don't pee in the swimming pool, right? As long as you don't pee in the lake as you're swimming, then the Nagas won't mind. Look, I'm not an expert on this. And of course, it's beyond my scope to actually perceive Nagas. But nevertheless, people who are sensitive do experience beings that we don't ordinarily see, including Nagas. And that's where there is, you could say, a little bit of protocol around Nagas. You remain clean and so forth. I've never heard there has been issues with swimming in water. It's not like they're there and they bump into you. They're intelligent and in fact, they're known for being particularly intelligent, the Nagas. They're known for being very wealthy and for being very intelligent and also very sensitive. They'll keep their distance, but what can you do if somebody starts peeing in your front yard, So that's where you just don't want to do that. All right. What's the difference between 5 and 8 suffering? Look, okay, number 5 and number 8. Okay, let me try to look at it. Is that what you're asking? Okay. Okay, let's go back to that. So hold on. So there was 8. That's the cause of beautiful people. It's not really clear to me. Are you? I'm not sure if I've gotten your question right, because are you enumerating these 8 here? Because it's not that clear. They haven't actually given the numerals, so it's not that clear what exactly the 8 are. Probably if we go in there and count them. So the 8 here I mentioned, I'm not sure what the 5 would be. So I might be a little bit guilty of not being able to answer that. What is the difference between 5 and 8 suffering?
There were 8, were they? So the 5th one and the 8th one.
Yeah, the thing is, it's not that clear what the 8 are. Well, if I could find what is number 1 and find out what number 8 is, but it's just all in a paragraph.
The last one?
Yeah, but they're not enumerated. They're sitting in the long. Okay, I can try to identify the first one. In accordance with the karma, beings afflicted through and through by the 3 principal kinds of suffering. So that's the 3 kinds of suffering, yeah? Beings are pain. They encounter what they do not want. They are deprived of what they wish for: wealth and possessions, sympathetic joy, humiliated. They must submit to. These then constitute the. Okay, let me just see here. Meeting unwanted. Oh yeah, and having what one does not want. I see. Okay, well that's a legit. Yeah, okay, I understand that. Meeting unwanted, encountering what we don't want, which is, of course, that we end up with what we don't want. Gosh, let's see here. Yeah, let's see here. All right, I'll try. I bet you your answer is as good as mine, to be honest. But let's try. We had it in here. Meeting unwanted circumstances. Not having what one wants. Okay, let's have a look. Meeting unwanted, when unwanted situations arise, such as meeting with enemies, that's unwanted circumstance. What's the other one here? Some people make greatest effort. Well, one is running into just what we don't like enemies. The other is not being able to prevent the unwanted. So I think there's a difference here. But honestly, I would say when these kind of questions come up, I mean, I can try to think about it, but I would also say your answer is as good as mine. If you think about this and look over it, ponder it, it'll actually, it's always good to have these questions, because when you actually have wrestled with it and thought about it, all of a sudden the answer becomes very clear. So I think, while I can kind of quickly see that this is where the difference lies, and I agree, they sound very similar. If you spend some time on this, I promise you'll be very clear on the difference. Not that I'm trying to avoid doing anything, avoiding the question. So then it says, now if you could just put on some light. Could you put the light on over there, and also the lamp over there? Thanks. If still time, I missed. If still time, I missed. Did you just let him in? Oh. If still time, I missed that you had started again last week. Anything personal to tell about a Buddhist experience around Australia's flood in 2022? Yeah, the truth of suffering, very much, and the truth of encountering what is unwanted, and that's probably like we have here, number 8, which is then that as much as we try to create the ideal conditions, houses and whatnot, then we encounter that we find out that we can't hold on to these. So anyway, I have someone here who actually had their house flooded. They would be able to give a much better answer. Anyway, I think I would say the images that you have in the media and so on are pretty telling. Yeah. I apologize if you've already discussed this, but what time does Tomorrow's Living is Dying teaching start? Same as this, so it will be 5:30 to 6:30 tomorrow. And also, incidentally, if you're practicing Ngundro, I should send out a mail. I'll try to do that now. I'll send out a mail about the fact that I'll be doing, like I do normally, 2 regions. There'll be one which is then Australian time from 7 to 9, and then that's Sunday night, and then again Monday morning from 10 to 12. So that's happening for those who are practicing Ngundro. So the level of insight and detail in understanding the suffering of beings is really astounding and touching. The authors of these texts were not ordinary for sure. That's really important, actually. That's a very good point. And that is where we could say we have the validity of this, not just as coming down through scripture as such, but also individuals that actually had experienced this. So we're not just talking about that there's a long time telling that this is what you experience when you're in the womb or whatever, but very much coming from direct experience of those who have gone through it. So yes, yeah. Okay, I think we'll conclude at that point. Thank you very much for joining me in this study, and we'll conclude with dedication. To all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. So, thank you.